Hey everybody, this is Rodney again. Today I'm here with Philippa, and she is, as it says on the screen, an NHI certified coach. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. We're going to go into several things. She does have a disability, she's overcome it, and she's a very, very successful person. And I want her to tell us basically how she did that. Um, in doing that, I noticed that you had said that you had produced some nonfiction books. Can you tell us a little bit about those? How many and
Yep.
what they're like? Is there a theme towards them? All that?
I've got one right here, Disability in the Tudors. That was published
Okay.
in November 2021. Because I'm a historian first and foremost, and my definiteness of purpose, if you like, with history is to normalise the conversation around disabled people of the past and to tell stories on how they have contributed to society, and just to change the way we talk about disability in general. And I started with the Tudors because they have a very unique perspective of disability. Henry VIII actually had two disabled people within his household who were painted in a family portrait. And that to me shows how significant and important they were to Henry VIII to have them included and be treated as if they were family members. And it's it's the way it should be for disabled people. Now we've gone into a situation from like the Industrial Revolution onwards where we institutionalize disabled people if they cannot look after themselves. And I feel the same way a bit about our elderly relations. We tend to shove them away in care homes once it gets to a point with them that we can't look after them because it interrupts our lives. And I think that disabled people, older people, have so much still to give society, to give their families, to give their communities, that they shouldn't be shut out. And that was one of the main themes that I came across when I was researching the 16th century and disability, because they just treated disabled people much different from how we're even treated now. You could infer that they treated disabled people better then than we're treated now, because they respected disabled people in a lot of instances. Because I don't know whether you've been around anybody with specific learning disabilities or perhaps Down syndrome, things like that. Some disabled people with learning disabilities just come out and say what they think. They don't care. They're really opinionated, which is a great thing. They just will tell you the truth no matter what. And this is what Henry VIII liked about having someone like William Summer around him all the time, because he actually had no agenda. He wasn't trying to promote himself. He wasn't trying to get money. He wasn't trying to um, become titled. He just had no filter, no agenda, no nothing. He just said to Henry exactly what he thought. And of course, if you're a king, you're going to get yes men around you all the time telling you what you want to hear. And this is why disabled people in that period were so edified, because they would come out and just speak the truth into situations for people. And it was also felt that because they had the ability to do that, and they didn't have like fear going on in the background, like their self talk and things like that, that they were closer to God, that God used them as a conduit to speak to people, used them for the Holy Spirit to speak through them into a situation. And that's what I find so fascinating about it. And that's still true today because, I mean, my uncle used to run a community in Ringwood in Dorset, which is in the UK, where they would be house parents for a select amount of disabled people. So they'd help them live in the community. They'd like help them go and work in a shop, or they'd help them to do pottery or bake bread or do all sorts of things under the sort of Rudolf Steiner school of education. And it's so true. They just literally say what they think, and it's so refreshing. That's what's so wonderful about it. And that's why I loved studying that particular area of history, because the Tudors were spot on with the way they felt about disabled people. Um, and so I not only have I done that non-fiction book, but I've also halfway through writing Disability in the Victorians, which, you know, I'm looking at people like Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, who had a particular physical disability, which made it very difficult for people to accept him the way that he was and the way that he looked. But it's also looking at the fact that he was the one that put himself in freak shows so that he could earn money. And
Hmm.
he stared back at people as they stared at him. So he had as much agency over himself and his audience as his audience did looking at him. And you know, but the Victorians had a very different view. They wanted to start fixing people and making people more acceptable to society. And if they weren't, if they couldn't contribute to the economy, if they um, were of no use in their families, if they couldn't earn their own money, then they were institutionalized. They were put out of sight and out of mind. Like, you know, they always say that, don't they, about children in the Victorian age? They had to be out of sight, out of mind, you know, not heard but seen but not heard. Um, and so attitudes changed quite a lot with disability um, then in that period. So I'm looking at that as well when I want to look at the Georgians and the madness of King George III and their attitudes to disability. I mean, there's so many people you could talk about. There was I've forgotten the name of the painter now, but there was a female painter who had no arms in the 18th century, and she painted these most beautiful paintings. You know, and you had the likes of Beethoven, who was deaf, you know, Helen Keller, who was had her disabilities. So it's very, I find it very fascinating how um, disabled people from the past adapted in their own period of time, and how they overcame and still made a difference despite what society would perceive them as or see them as, sometimes as worthless, not able to make a difference, you know, those kind of perceptions, which really are wrong.
Right. And that really is what this show is all about. It's highlighting, yes, there is a disability. Here's what we did to overcome it, and here's what it's like now. In fact, could you tell us a little bit about what it was like with your disability? What happened to trigger you to be in success mindset, and what it's like now that you have been in the successful world for quite some time now?
Well, I mean, when I was born, you know, we were still in that draconian idea of disability should be hidden, disability should be institutionalized, disability doesn't really help anybody, let's just shut them away. And if we can't fix them, let's just shut them away. That was, you know, I was born in 1970, but that was still going on. Um, I was born premature. I was born at 26 weeks and I weighed £2 2 ounces. So, because of that fact, my organs hadn't developed properly. My, well, all of me hadn't developed properly the way, it should do in babies if they're born at normal times. And because the medical knowledge was still lacking really at that time, the doctors gave me too little oxygen or too much oxygen to keep me alive, because of course my lungs weren't developed properly, my heart wasn't developed properly. And so according to my parents, I died over 10 times, and I was resuscitated every time. So the doctors had to give me a certain amount of oxygen to keep me alive. And so that wrong amount of oxygen, should we say, caused brain damage. And my parents weren't aware that I had a problem until I was about 6-8 months old. I was in hospital for a long time anyway. I was in hospital for about 6 months. And then they'd see my cognitive abilities weren't that good, or my movement wasn't that good. And so then that's when I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And it's something that cannot be cured. It's something that you're stuck with for the whole of your life. That it, depending on that amount of brain damage, some people can be affected with their speech, with their hand and arm movements, with their cognitive abilities, with their ability to walk. They can't maybe look after themselves in terms of feed themselves. It just depends on what card you've been dealt when you're diagnosed with that. And I have got a problem where I find walking difficult. I didn't walk until I was about 5 or 6 properly. My balance is rubbish. I'll never be able to wear a pair of high heel shoes. I will never be able to run. I can't even do the most mundane and easiest of things, like sit on the floor cross-legged or get up from the floor unaided. Like most people, just the things that most people take for granted, I physically am unable to do. And for a lot of my life, until I guess I was in my early 40s, I hated even acknowledging my disability. I didn't like drawing attention to it, but the problem was, because of the way I walked and because I've got a very pronounced waddle or gait, if you like, you can't unsee it. That's the first thing that most people will notice about me when I walk down the street. And so as a teenager, I found that really, really difficult, because I was always being stared at. I always had comments made about me. Woe betide anybody if I was out with my mum shopping or anything, and she overheard them say anything, because she would be like a bull in a china shop. She would go and confront people, and I'd say, no, come on, just leave it. And I learnt to let it go over my head. Even though it hurt, I just learnt to adapt, and I got used to it. And so I was a teenager during the time of, how can I put it? It's not really a phenomenon I think you had in the States, but like when punk was around and the New Romantics and Boy George and all that lot. So I'm like 13, 14. I'm dyeing my hair jet black. I've got tons of makeup on. I've got proper goth clothing on, big crucifixes, holy mohair jumpers, buckle boots from the King's Road in London, the whole kit and caboodle, because I thought that if I dressed up that way, it was a bit tribal at the time to be like that. And then people would look at me dressed a bit punky, a bit gothy, rather than look at my disability. It was like an unsaid thing. My mum hated it. She just never understood why I dressed like that. because she always used to say to me, "You're a really attractive girl. Why are you spoiling yourself like that?" But that's just how it was. Um, and I guess the older I've got, and the more I've lived my life and have different experiences, I got to a point where I thought, no, sod it. I've just got to accept myself for who I am in the body that I'm in, because one, I was made in God's image, and He sees nothing wrong in me at all. And one day I'm going to get to a point where He welcomes me into heaven, and I'm going to be walking around in my Louis Vuitton shoes and my Jimmy Choo shoes. I'm going to have a wardrobe full of these high heel shoes because he's going to love it. He's going to have them all there waiting for me. And I have got to use what I've been given for the benefit of other people, because I wouldn't be the person or have the character I've got if I wasn't disabled. And I know that sounds a really strange thing to say, but I think I might have been proud. I think I might have been arrogant. I think I might have been full of myself. I think I would have probably had strings and strings of relationships. And I've not been like that. And I try my best to stay humble, because if I can teach other people about living with a disability, despite the fact that I don't like it, then I'm helping other people. I'm serving other people. I'm making a difference to other people. And that really is something I've only just learned this late in life, to accept myself for who I am, because I can't change it. I've been to big Christian meetings where I've seen people being pushed into these meetings in their wheelchairs, and they actually come out of the meetings pushing their wheelchairs. So I have really strong faith that God can do anything that He wants to do. And I've heard stories from other disabled people who've been physically healed and transformed by the power of God. But for some reason, that's never happened to me, even though it was promised to me when I was 21 and I got baptized. And I'm like, well, I sort of reason with myself and think, well, no, maybe that wasn't meant to happen for me, because if it had, I wouldn't now be helping all the people I intend to be helping who are disabled. So I look at it positively. I've got two gorgeous teenage boys. Well, they're not teenagers really now. I've got one of 19 and one of 21 who I absolutely adore. And they are wonderful human beings. But they notice me being stared at when they're out with me, and they're ready to punch somebody's lights out. They get really frustrated. But I say to them, look, just leave it. It's just ignorance. And that's why I'm here, to tell my story publicly, so people have more of an understanding, so we normalise the conversation about disability. Society has now normalised talking about people with different skin colours or different cultures or different sexualities, but they haven't normalised talking about disabled people. Film studios and TV companies would rather cast a non-disabled person in a disabled person's role. I don't understand that. Where's our representation? The only one that's recently happened is the series on Disney Plus, Shard Lake, where it's got a disabled actor playing a disabled character, and hats off to them for doing that, because they're helping to change the conversation around disability. So everything I'm doing in my life from now on is about changing the conversation in society around disability in whatever sphere I work in. I'm not only am I a qualified historian, a qualified beauty therapist. I had my own businesses, nail salons and things. Um, and then when I got divorced, I went into a completely different direction. I qualified as a secondary school teacher, and that was challenging because I would go into secondary schools, high school age kids as a disabled person, and that would trigger conversations from the students. Oh, miss, why do you walk like that? And that would be like, in front, one student would ask me that question in front of a class of 30, and I'd be like, okay, do I just answer the question now in the middle of the lesson, or do I take them to one side and deal with it? And I thought, no, just tell them the truth, just be honest now there and then in the class. And then I'm like, oh right, okay. And then we'd move on to the rest of the lesson. And it's not until people see and can relate to disabled people that you begin to dispel the ignorance. But I've also had schools and the education system in this country where in one year I think I applied for about 160 teaching jobs and I hadn't got one. So I was doing what you would call supply teaching. Um, cover teaching. And so I was never making a particular school my home. I wasn't building relationships with staff or students. I'd be teaching completely different subjects. One day I might be teaching photography, and then I might be teaching art, then I might be teaching catering, then I might be teaching textiles, then I might be teaching a bit of history. It was just too fragmented for me. And in the end, I gave up applying for jobs because schools saw me and my disability as a liability, because it meant they would have to face up to having these kind of conversations in schools, not only with their staff members, but with their pupils as well.
Hmm.
They saw me as too much of a liability in terms of health and safety, or what do we do with her when we've got a fire alarm going off and she's got to look after 30 students, for example. She can't stand for long periods of time in one place or position, so we can't have her supervising kids out in the grounds at lunchtime. Oh, what if the kids get into a fight? She won't be able to break it up. Those sorts of things I could see were going through the minds of the people that were interviewing me, although they didn't say it. So I was always fobbed off with, oh, you're a newly qualified teacher and you haven't got that much experience, and we've interviewed somebody else and we've taken them on for the job instead. That was the excuse I always got. So I could never prove that it was discrimination because of my disability. So now I've completely left all that hard work I did qualifying as a teacher, stupidly and naively thinking that teaching would be a great profession for me to be in, but not thinking about the perceptions of other staff members or the education system and what they thought of me, when they should have been thinking this is a person who's going to be a great asset, because they'll be able to empathise and sympathise with students with special educational needs. They'll be a role model for those students to show that they can overcome challenges no matter what. They missed a trick, but sod it, it doesn't matter. That's where I'm at with it now, because I'm halfway through a part-time PhD and I am studying disability history, but I'm studying disability history from a critical narrative, from a historiography narrative, and from planning and making resources that can be used by teachers to teach disability history on our national curriculum, for example. So that's what I'm doing, so that we can again go back to my definiteness of purpose, which is normalize the conversation around disability.
And it seems like you're doing a lot about others and to help others. And it seems like you've kind of gotten out of yourself to go out of your way to help other people. When did you, and a lot of successful people show that same tendency. When did that develop, and or how did it develop? You think?
Well, I've always had a very strong character. Anybody that knows me really well will know that I'm always really honest. I'm always really upfront. Um, and I have a heart for other people from a very, very, very young age. And I believe that is because I know I was meant to be here. I know I was meant to have a purpose, despite the challenges I've got. I know God's put me here for a reason. I've always had a heart for God, even though I was a punky goth. somebody that you somebody that you wouldn't have thought would be interested in Christianity or religion at all, but I just kept it very quiet when I was that age.
Punks for
Um,
Jesus.
and, and I because I actually came to Jesus through a Ouija board, believe it or not,
Oh wow.
when I was
That's
14 years old. Not that I was doing it, but you know what it's like, a rainy Saturday afternoon, you have a room full of your friends from school. Well, what should we do? Oh, let's do a Ouija board. And through that experience of being able to tangibly feel a presence that wasn't God, gave me a kick up the backside and made me weigh up, what on earth am I doing, even though it wasn't my suggestion. And that's when I gave my heart to God, because I knew it was the right thing to do, and because being in that side of things wasn't for me, wasn't meant for me. And it was just boredom of teenagers. You know what teenagers are like, you
mm-hmm.
know. And my stepbrother at the time had been killed about 5 years before in a road accident, and they were like trying to persuade me to do a seance to call him up, and Elvis and all those sorts of people that you usually do with things like that. But it just gave me such a strong awareness that not only are we physical beings, we're emotional and spiritual beings as well. And I'd always had that knowledge within me. It's just that I needed to find out how God was going to use me. What was he going to do with me? Because there's that passage in scripture that says God uses the weak to confound the wise. Well, in society's eyes, a disabled person is weak, is ineffective, is not worth anything. But in God, I'm worth everything because I'm made in his image. And that's why I believe God wants me to go out and share my story, share the different things I've been through. Not that I've overcome my disability, because I'll never overcome my disability, because it's something physical, tangible, that unless by divine intervention God does decide to heal me, that is not going to change. So I had to learn to accept myself with my disability and be able to do things in spite and despite that, because I'm a spiritual being. Once I die, this body won't matter anymore, but my spirit remains the same. And it's what can I do to serve people who are disabled, who have low self-esteem, low self-worth, um, low self-confidence, low belief in themselves and their abilities because they're disabled. Because disabled people have completely different paradigms and assumptions about themselves than non-disabled people. And because I've got this disability, I've got a greater insight into disability than, say, somebody who hasn't.
Right.
Like when I was 10 years old, my mum made me watch um, the John Hurt starring as the Elephant Man in the film, and I cried buckets. I was only 10 years old, but I felt in my heart what that man must have gone through. I'm not talking about the acting, I'm talking about the kind of life he had, and how he was ridiculed, and the things that were done to him and the abuse that he had. But he still kept going no matter what. And through me sharing a little bit about my life, my story, the way I look at things, if I can just help one person and make a difference to one person so they get off their backside and stop feeling sorry for themselves and change their life because it's what they want and because they can see more about themselves rather than just their physicality, then that's the most important thing. And that's another reason why I became a coach with the Napoleon Hill Institute, because again, I want to change that conversation around disability. I mean, a lot of people in personal development say, "Oh, don't call yourself disabled." But I'm like, sorry, this is me. I can't change that. Physically, I cannot change that, but I can change the way I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot care about what other people think about me and my disability. So I'm not denying myself, but I can just change my attitude towards it. And I can support others in them changing their attitudes toward themselves. And that's my passion, is just to really change the conversation around disability, because so often the whole subject is just wiped under the carpet, brushed under the carpet, like the Victorians used to do. Oh, we can just shove them in an institution. If we can't fix them, if we can't make them acceptable to society, let's just shove them in an institution and leave them be. And I'm afraid to say it, that is the way that the world is going now at the moment with disability. I thought things were really changing in the mid-90s with politics and everything. But now we are just going back to a draconian point of view on disability, because disabled people aren't economically viable, because we don't contribute anything. We're seen as worthless. I want to change that conversation.
Well, I think you single handedly have done more for changing that conversation than anybody that I know. I mean, you've written books, um, you have become a Napoleon Hill Institute coach, um, you even have a charity um, that you are starting now. Uh, can you tell us, as long as we're talking about the charity, can you tell us a little bit about that charity and what its mission is
Yeah.
and how people can help?
Mm. Well, it's called AIMS, and it's accessibility, inclusion, mindset, and service. It's registered as a community interest company, so it's not a fully fledged charity, but it's a non-profit. And my idea behind it is to sponsor other disabled people into mentorship courses with companies like the Napoleon Hill Institute, other coaches from other companies as well who are offering slightly different courses. It might be Proctor Gallagher Institute, it might be Kathleen Cameron, it might be whoever, but predominantly the Napoleon Hill Institute. And so that disabled people can start using the material and the principles that we share and that we teach within the Institute to help them change their attitudes about themselves, and the perceptions about their own disability, so they can start creating a life for themselves that they love. It's not about other people doing it for them. It's about them doing it for themselves through changing their mindset and their ideas about disability, about themselves, and all of that. It's about freeing people up. And the reason why I wanted to do a charity is because there are quite a lot of disabled people who, through no fault of their own, are so physically disabled that they are unable to go out and do a 9 to 5 job or a blue collar job, or they are limited by employers who don't want to take them on in jobs because it's too much hassle. And so therefore disabled people get themselves boxed in to a situation where they might not be able to earn the money for themselves, or they might be on welfare, or they might be in the benefit system within the UK, and they're stuck on a limited amount of money to live on every single month. So there is no way, come hell or high water, that they can find the money to be able to pay for personal development courses. And so what the charity is about is us raising money, me and the other directors within it, raising money so that we can then allow disabled people to come and apply to us and say, I want to do this course. I want to be able to do this because I want these results in my life. And I acknowledge that this is the only way that I can do it. This is the support that I need in terms of they might be blind and need Think and Grow Rich in Braille, for example, or in large print, or, you know, whatever they might need, or they might need something in an audio book, if, you know, whatever. And it's about meeting those needs and helping them through the courses, and also either part paying for a course for somebody or paying for a course in full for somebody, so that they can then access mentorship or any other shorter courses that we do, to really make a difference to them. But if somebody applies and we sponsor them, then they have to be accountable to myself and the other directors and to whoever they're doing the course, to say that they're going to do and be on 75% of the calls, that they are going to be doing the homeworks they've been asked to do, so that we know that they're fully in the game, they've got skin in the game, so to speak, so that then we can see that, yes, they're doing the work, so yes, they're going to get the results that they want. Because there's no point a charity like AIMS paying for somebody to do a course, and then they might occasionally get on 1 or 2 live calls every other week or whatever, and they're not studying and they're not doing the homework, and it's not making a difference to them. So then if that happens, then we'll just cut somebody out of being able to continue until we have like a definite sort of plan in place, so that they can carry on with it and that they are going to do the work. And I've got to be really strict about that, because obviously we're using charitable monies to help people. So that's what I'm looking to do. I'm solving several problems. One with the finances, which is normally can be an objection when we talk to people about personal development. And 2, I'm really helping to support people change their lives for the better to what they want them to be. So that's the idea of the charity. It might be somebody who's been disabled from birth, like myself. It might be somebody who's become disabled through being a veteran, for example. It might be somebody who has been in a car accident and maybe something's happened to them. You know, it might be like poor old Christopher Reeve, for example, who fell off his horse and was paralysed from the neck down. You know, any situation, as long as they can prove they've got a disability and they don't mind sharing how it affects them, so that we can then support them to the best of our ability with what they might need in terms of books, in terms of PDFs, in terms of regular conversations, all that kind of stuff. But that's what I'm looking to do, and just change the conversation again around disability, one person at a time as we bring them in. So, for example, I've applied to our national lottery in the UK for funding for the charity at the moment. I've got a GoFundMe page, and I'm looking to do. You're going to think I'm crazy now. I'm looking to do a tandem skydive with the British Army over Salisbury Plain in the south of England to also raise money for the charity. Hopefully, by the end of this year, I will do that. Um, because obviously I hate heights. It's one of my biggest fears, because obviously I'm a wobbly person, and I don't like falling over at the best of times. So if I can conquer my fear of heights by doing a skydive, then I think that would be pretty good. And if I can do it to benefit other people at the same time, then even better. So yeah, so my whole umbrella, my whole reason for being is to encourage other people, support other people, change the conversation around disability, whether I'm doing it through history, whether I'm doing it through teaching, whether I'm doing it through my PhD, whether I'm doing it through Napoleon Hill Institute, or just being a role model myself. That's what my life is about now.
And not only do you have a charity and you're working on history books, but you actually have a couple of book studies going on right now, I believe.
Yeah, I absolutely adore doing them, even though we've had a few technical problems with, links and bits and pieces and Zoom and whatever. So another friend of mine who's in the UK, um, we're doing Think and Grow Rich together on a Friday evening at 6 p.m. UK time. So that would be 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so what we do is we've got a small group of people where we go through reading the chapters of Think and Grow Rich, but we do it really slowly, and we allow people to give their takeaways or insights into what they're reading, how it might apply to them. It's just like a group where we all learn together. And then the same with Napoleon's book, Outwitting the Devil, which I absolutely adore. And I adore that book because Napoleon gives the devil a kick up the backside right through that book, especially in the interview. And it also gives me some insights and some explanations as to why disabled people exist. And the biggest takeaway in that book for me is where the devil says, I make people disabled so they cannot get close to God. So that's a barrier to God, because they will blame God because they're disabled. Because if you're not in line with God, source, universal intelligence, whatever you want to call it, then how can you expect to be used and to make a difference? So if you've got resentments there, if you've got pain there, if you've got a feeling of unworthiness or of lack or of limitation, because the devil, so to speak, has put a disability on you, then you're not going to be effective. You're not going to want to serve other people. You're not going to want to make a difference, because you're going to want to wallow in self-pity. And that's one of the hugest insights from that book that I got.
It's one of my favorite books too. I really love it when they're talking about drifting,
Yes.
because that is so me. I can just drift through life with no particular purpose in mind, almost like the Joker on a tarot card, how he's skipping towards the cliff, and his puppy dog is trying to pull him back, but he's just skipping right along. Um, that's what drifting is to me, and it's so easy to get into. That really is one of my favorite books.
But we're all drifting to a certain extent until we are enlightened and our awareness is raised through this personal development material, you know?
Agreed.
And you
Uh,
just have to course correct, keep the blinkers on like a horse, and just keep focused on your goal all the time. And even teachers like Bob Proctor used to say that he used to say about his paradigms. He used to say, "Oh, that bitch is back." He'd still suffer. He'd still suffer with those problems with paradigms coming up and raising their ugly head. We're
mhm.
like that all the time. We've just got to learn to control it, learn to keep our focus, learn to do that exercise like the dot on the wall, where we're just staring at that dot on the wall, bringing ourselves back all the time to our focus and our goal, because otherwise we will allow ourselves to drift, and we will allow human nature and our old habits to take over. And with personal development and everything that we study and everything we do, it's not just right, let's just do one course and yes, I'm fixed. It's nothing like that. It's a lifetime of doing this work. It's being in a lifestyle of this work, which is why it's so important to surround yourself with people who think the same, believe the same, get the kind of results that you want to have. Because if you surround yourself with people who suffer with depression, anxiety, limiting beliefs, a poor self-image, guess what you're going to attract? You're going to attract that into yourself all the time. But if you surround yourself with people who take challenges head on, who keep persisting in their goal regardless of outside circumstances, who are successful, not only, I'm not just talking about financially, I'm talking about successful in their relationships, in their family relationships, in their careers, in all aspects of their life, then guess what? You're going to attract that to you too. And that's what coaching is all about. It's all about us helping one another, serving one another, making a difference to people, and not allowing them to stay stuck. But it's not about us doing the work for them. It's about us pointing out their blind spots and the things they're struggling with, and helping them point their mind in a new direction that's going to change things for them. That's it.
I used to. One thing that I remember from growing up, I read a lot of books, and I don't remember which one this came out of, but let me ask you a question. How do you spell guru?
GURU.
And that's the mission of coaches too, isn't it? G,
Yeah,
you or you, is to help people, is to kind of act as a mirror and help people see themselves and help them through areas of difficulty.
exactly. But I stress that you don't do the work for them. They've got to do it for themselves.
Right, right. Or it
You're
doesn't
there
count.
to walk, you're there to walk alongside people, but you can't do it for them, because they have to find the will and the determination and the persistence inside themselves to do it for themselves.
Hmm. Well, we're about out of time here. I'd like to thank you for joining us and to sharing a little bit about your life and the things that have made you successful so that hopefully, like you said, this can change one other person and that other person can change another person and this can live on. That's kind of
Yeah.
why I'm doing this, and I think that's why you agreed to come on today. And I want to thank you very much.
Oh, it's been an absolute joy, Rodney, and I love talking to you. And I know you're going to do amazing things as well. So thank you for allowing me the time to come and speak to you.
Well, thanks for being here. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye bye.